right. And for our next talk, we have Dr. Bryan Unruh, along with collaborators Dr. Adam Dale and Dr. Pablo Agustin Bueri. And he's going to be presenting on conversion of conventional turf-dominated to alternative landscapes, points to ponder.
All right, well, imagine if you will. First of all, I don't preach very well in front of a pulpit. I'm used to wandering around and getting in front of people, but we'll make it work. So imagine if you will, a fat guy and a skinny guy. I'm the fat guy, sitting in director's chairs up here in the front, having kind of this Siskel and Ebert conversation going on, moderated by Adam Dale, talking about kind of this conversion of turf-dominated landscapes over to alternatives. We can define that or whatever. But really it's these points to ponder. And so back up a little bit, back in 2019, which just seems like an eternity ago, a bunch of us congregated in this room and did that so terrible practice of putting dots on paper and voting and all of that nonsense. That was really interesting. But we had a year-long facilitated process really kind of aimed at building kind of these multidisciplinary faculty teams committed, this is excerpted straight from the report, committed to developing science-based recommendations for Florida urban landscapes. And there were these work groups that were formed, okay? So we had the lawn and urban landscape, the long-term landscape change preferences and perceptions, people behavior change, water nutrient efficiency of landscapes. And then they said, you got to pick one. And I'm like, I want all of them because they're all kind of intriguing. And what's been interesting over the last day and a half that we've spent together is many of the presentations that we've heard really kind of center around all of these various work groups. Now, the global pandemic that we have been experiencing, I think, has kind of slowed the collective progress of this future urban landscape discussion. And I say collective progress because we've learned of stuff that's continued to go on for the last 2 years. But I still think, candidly, that we're still a bit siloed. And I think we still somehow have to push through this because these issues that were identified through this year-long facilitated process are still just as prevalent today, maybe more so. And so as the previous speaker had a funnel, I have a funnel, but the funnel only has 4 buckets of paint because I couldn't find a funnel with more buckets of paint. And so we look at these and people's priorities and their preferences and the biodiversity and the environment and the plant palette, of which turfgrass is just a plant that gets personified evilly. And maintenance considerations all get kind of thrown into this funnel, and then what squirts out the bottom of this thing is the future urban landscape. I mean, isn't that maybe accurate? Now we want to tend to, I got a thumbs up from Gail, so we're doing good. I can't move too far. I'm stuck. But this future urban landscape, I think what's happening is we want to put a little more blue in there than orange, or put a little more yellow in there than green. And the reality is that we've got these kind of vexing issues. And so Siskel and Ebert up here, moderated by Augustine, we were going to ponder these 5 points. And these are just 5. There's dozens of points. And first, landscapes and people are not independent of one another, though we tend to sometimes act like they are. Many refer to lawns and or turf grass as sterile. I've been in meetings where when somebody says turf grass, they hiss on the S's. And I wrestle with that. But are they really? Realistic solutions seek compromise. Economics largely drive decision making. And then do we assume that the same people who improperly manage the current landscape are just going to magically properly manage the new landscape? And so let's ponder some of these in this quote. Well, let me ask before we do this. How many of you people like to see pictures of yourself? You know what I mean? Raise your hand. I'm interactive. This is as much interaction as we. Raise your hand. Do you like to see pictures of yourself? Yes. Raise your hand. Be proud. That's like 4 of you. How many of you can't stand seeing pictures of yourself? Raise your hand. The majority of you. Why? I grew up. My mom took pictures of everything. I don't remember anything from my childhood. I really don't. But what the few things that I think I remember are probably just because I remember the picture that was taken that has me in there. What are we doing? So we need to recognize that the landscapes of city dwellers, homes, neighborhoods, parks, roadsides, and businesses are public portraits of themselves. This is in an article, Messy Ecosystems, Orderly Frames. And I've pondered that Because when it comes to landscape design and management practices or recommendations, it ultimately boils down to what do people want. And we look at this, and there's actually psychology on why you hate you in photos. I mean, you can read about it, it's kind of interesting. And then this really throws me off because that selfie phenomenon thing. How many of you do selfies? Be honest. I have not figured out how to hold the camera. I can't make duck lips. I mean, it doesn't work. And so, but this conflict is happening out there because these landscapes are public perceptions of ourselves. Basil looks one way. He's kind of got this hair thing going. Genetics kicked in at some point along the way, and I don't have hair. I mean, and so when we think about that, his landscape's going to look very different because he looks very different. I mean, my landscape's going to look different because I look different. And so when we think about these, I think we should objectively provide this suite of options that satisfy a range of priorities and preferences of people, and maybe not force one upon another. And it could be turf, and it could be wild vegetation. I'm cool with weeds. I mean, whatever. So I was a poor grad student, well, come out of grad school, a lot of debt. This is our first house, typical tract home. It's interesting when I look back at the picture, I don't really remember that so much of that slope, but this was it. This is what I got, okay? And it had a little wrap of grass around the perimeter. And because I was poor, and my colleague Matt Thetford taught a landscape design class in the environmental hort department, he brought all these students over to my house and interviewed my wife and I. Well, what do you want? That's preferences and what do we want? And so this is what's interesting is that Bradford pear, which I understand is like a really bad tree now. We don't recommend. And so but this was what the students came up with. Gail's back there like, oh my gosh, what were they teaching? And so, but interestingly, this was what the backyard was, okay? Because it was just grass, and grass is cheap. Planted a few trees along the back there, right? Well, got a dog, he fertilized twice a day. Bryan fertilized every other year because it doesn't really need it. And we look at this, and we started fostering about a decade ago. And these little ones, some would say this is a waste of water, but you know what? Many of these little kids have never played in sprinklers. And it's kind of hard to play in sprinklers on top of Asiatic jasmine. I mean, right? But notice that over time, and that back corner back there got trampled because that's kind of in the sun went across. That back corner is where kids would kind of hang out in the late afternoon. And so we built this thing, right? Put the kids to work, scooping mulch. It changed over time. We had to have a place, to sit, wasn't in the sun, and so we put the back on and landscape. This was my yard, okay? And it was shaped by the 24 children that we had living in our home at the time, right? And so we think about that. We got Daisy dog down here in the front, little wildlife. And so, but things change over time. We said these lawns and turf grass are often dubbed sterile or biodiversity deserts, but really are they? Interestingly, these are gross generalizations. This is a quote from Dr. Dell that, that we disregard the value of lawns and urban ecosystems when we make statements like this. And clearly, we look at, I clicked on it too fast for you, Basil. But if you saw Augustine's poster in the back, it's interesting, the total abundance of arthropods in the pitfall traps, these were the kind of the crawlers, were greater in the peanut and turfgrass mix in the turfgrass plots compared to the forests. The number of insects that were walking around, the diversity of the order level community didn't differ between the vegetative treatments. Mulch didn't contribute a whole lot for us. Augustine didn't get into really any of the data. What's interesting now, there's lysimeters under each of these plots. That mulch is leaching nitrogen like crazy. It's breaking down. I mean, and so we think about this serpent fly thing. We got a call from a grower saying, we got these little flies and they're laying these maggots everywhere and they're going to destroy our grass and all that. So we sent students over there that figured out it's a serpent fly thing. And we tend to, I think, do a disservice by putting pretty pictures of pollinators with the flower and the bee. You know what I mean? And there's one right outside the door down here. It makes a good picture. But when we think about it, I hid the folder photo, 5 to 7.5% of people in their lifetime will experience a significant health issue from a bee sting or an insect bite. That's a pretty interesting statistic. And when we've had conversations about some of these pollinator habitats, we tend to focus on bees and honeybees because they're kind of cool. But a lot of people are like, whoa, I don't want any honeybees or bees in my yard. Now they're coupled with butterflies, but what about these serpent flies? What's interesting is the serpent fly looks like a yellow fly. because it's yellow, but it's not the yellow fly that bites the crap out of it, okay? And so they're over there swatting these things, but they are harmless insects. Realistic solutions seek compromise. People are resistant to change. Some aren't willing to learn new information or maybe even unlearn wrong information. And the turf and ornamental industries are major economic machines and support a bunch of jobs. And Pierce, you said this as well, the development is driven by economics. It's about selling houses. And whatever the minimum cost to get that house sold is what it's going to take. So we look at these, and so there's a place for turf and ornamentals and native plants in the urban landscapes as well. And so that being said, Dr. Dell and I have discussed this. And by the way, he's not here because he's at home holding a baby boy. And so he's a healthy baby, big baby boy. There are problems with these systems, and we've seen over the last day and a half doing a lot of research on these things. Again, economics largely drive decision making. But think about this is back in the days when we really didn't have any money, and grass was cheap. Did some math on Augustine's plots, the coreopsis, the frog fruit, and the mimosas, $2.50 per 1 gallon pot. So that's probably a wholesale price, I would suggest. I mean, now this doesn't include any freight. So that was, 1,000 square feet was $3,200. Sod only $300 current price. That's why developers roll the sod out. But in time, we're going to see these landscapes change as well. Do we assume that the same people who improperly manage their current landscape will properly manage the alternatives? Recycling is a good thing, unless you use your bubble wrap as your weed barrier in your landscape beds, right? I walked out of the hotel one day and I glanced down and I saw, because the light was kind of catching it. I got down and I looked, that's bubble wrap. You know what I mean? Get the box from Amazon, got the bubble wrap. The whole place had the mulch on top of bubble wrap. I'm like, wow. Not a lot of water infiltrating through that one. What's that?
Helps prevent compaction.
Helps prevent compaction. So we're gonna, they call me the paparazzi of turf because I like to drive around taking pictures of stupid. We were at a theme park that boasts a lot of aquatic critters in Central Florida. We're sitting there taking a break. It was like 117 degrees in the shade. This guy comes walking by, and he had a bag of polymer coated urea, or a bucket of polymer coated urea. And he was just slinging it. And what you don't see in the picture is that some of that polymer coated urea was hitting the water. And what you don't see, but the ducks were over there and they heard the pitter patter of the polymer coated urea hit the water, and like, oh, duck food, and here they come. And so are we going to make an assumption that when we go put these increasingly complex landscapes into plant palettes into the landscape, that our landscape community is going to be prepared to effectively manage these, or the homeowners? And so we think about these kinds of things and these points to ponder. And so again, landscapes and people are not independent of one another. And those things change over time. We no longer foster 24 will wear you out. Our very first foster baby so I have like grown kids and grandkids, and then I have a 9 soon to be 10-year-old. And we've thought through it just, as we raise him and the grandkids, we've moved from that house. We're trying to build in a pandemic, which is stupid, on an 11-acre site. And we got 2 horses, which if you don't have horses, don't ever get horses. So I had to selectively clear some of that property for the horses to go. And then the 10-year-old, he drives a gas-powered horse called a 4-wheeler. And so running around and, trying to find places like that. And, so what does that look like? And to be candid, I hate watering grass. I hate fertilizing grass. And I really despise mowing grass because I started mowing when I was 7 years old. And so now I've got trying to figure out, what does this property look like? Gail, you want me? How do we go in and make this functional? Again, many reference lawns and turf grasses as these sterile or biodiversity deserts. Up until we really started working through the future urban landscape discussion, my program was pretty focused on turf and improving turf with lower input grasses and evaluating them and better management practices, and have had a dramatic shift in the program now, where we're focusing on, pollinator counts and biodiversity and hooking all this stuff together. And we've learned a tremendous amount in all of this. And realistic solutions seek compromise. Economics largely drive decision making. And then I think we've got this group here. If we were to do an IFAS show of hands, let's do that. IFAS show of hands. If you're with IFAS or affiliated with the University of Florida, raise your hand. That's like almost all of us. And then there's a few folks that are from the industry that are here. Okay. And so you industry folks that have heard everything the last day and a half, you've got a tremendous job over the next, let's give you 2 months to go educate the 54,000 lawn care applicators out there of what you've learned over the last day and a half. And so we're kind of really good at preaching to the audience. But I think we're creating some real challenges with our management. I mean, we can't get people to manage the landscapes that we have properly. Now let's go increase the complexity of these things. I mean, we could simply say, well, let's just not, let's let the weeds grow, which I'm okay with that. My lawn was like the nicest lawn in the neighborhood. People are like, what do you do? Nothing. But I'll tell you the secret, my lawn looked good at 20 miles an hour. Because if you got out on it, I had doveweed over there and a chamber bit. We had all these weeds growing, but it was green and I mowed really straight lines. Okay. So it looked like it was all manicured. And I ran an edger along the edges, so it looked crisp and clean. It was weedy. So this is the palette that we have to work with. I encourage us to let's not drop. I know the Future Urban Group is meeting next Monday. They're working on this white page. But we come back together. One of the things I've heard, and I'm an old guy, so I can kind of say these things, but we've heard a lot of really cool stuff over the last day and a half. But I've also visited with some of our county extension folks where research is going on in the county in which they reside, and they know nothing about it. But we need to do better. We need to do better. Because what ultimately happens is the county commissioner calls and says, well, what do you think about all this? They don't have a clue. And so this is the future urban landscape down there. Doesn't have to be all green, does it? I came from a turf guy. All right. Yellow light. Question?
Just a question about a statement you made about increasing the complexity in management. My question is, and I'm not sure if you have an answer for this, but is it more complex or is it just different? And we're not, there's just not common yet.
So the question is what I mentioned, we're creating increasingly complex landscapes. Are they increasingly complex or just different? I think it's all of the above. Okay. Because we have a tremendous number of invasive, can't use that word. Whatever word. We can use it. We have a number of weeds that just will flat take things out. Doveweed. When I came to Florida 27 years ago, doveweed was only in Duval County. And then Aaron Harlow started spreading it all over the state of Florida. And so it is ubiquitous now across the state, and it is a monster, and it will displace tons of stuff. And so how do we manage this? Augustine presented about the perennial peanut mix. The reality is it gets weedy. And so do we just let it go? Basil would say, let her go. No, I wouldn't. And so we think, and it kind of depends on, well, what is that? But then there's the complexities is that there are essentially no herbicides labeled for that type of fix, and then it comes back down to people's preference. For whatever reason, people are stuck, they see that one weed from a mile away. There are 2 Kalinga plants in that picture I showed of the turf plot. And I saw them when I was reviewing the slides. Most people would never see that, but there were 2 Kalinga plants in Augustine's picture. Okay. I'll fixate on those because I'm a little OCD, but how do we just, if it gets a little weedy, let it go. That was a long-winded answer. We're done. We're still.
You're good. You have
Question?
actually 5 minutes additional for questions.
What? Everybody's like, get that guy out of here.
So this, I don't know if you want to get into this question, that's obviously, but you said the mulch is leaching out nitrate or nitrogen like crazy. Is that, I mean, I know it's the mulch breaking down, but would you expect that to continue until you apply a new batch of mulch, or is it kind of like establishment period for turf? Do you have any thoughts on that?
I think any of the, the question is, as I mentioned, the fact that our mulch is leaching like crazy, and will that subside at some point? Clearly, I mean, eventually it's going to break down. We've had discussions because we put a barrier in between the mulch and the soil. What happens if you take that barrier out so that you have soil to mulch contact? I'm really intrigued right now by the whole mineralization side of things, and Evan and I've talked a lot about, you know, the compost. We tend to focus on one dimension, for example, like incorporating composts for water holding capacity, but we have to recognize we're introducing a ton of phosphorus and nitrogen into that same environment. We put we don't necessarily wouldn't recommend just a mulch bed, although there are those that do. But what happens if you don't have a plant there to assimilate the nitrogen that's falling out of the sky that Mary spoke about? What happens? So we've got to have some, there's got to be a plant. But will it subside? Yes. But are they going to replenish the mulch? Yeah, there's companies that do nothing but replenish mulch. So, Susan. Stacey.
Yeah, I'm curious, I know about the Green Industries BMP class, and I'm curious what other education there is for the industry to also, like some of the, like during this conference, we've been talking so much about multiple species in the yards and kind of being okay with that. Like, how is that information getting out to the industry to see, can they have a role in educating or discussing it with their clients, right? Because it's a discussion.
Okay, so the question was, we have the GIBMP training and whatnot, and so how do we, you know, what types of education opportunities are out there? Well, we have 67 counties. Our county extension faculty are constantly putting on programs, and a few of them are here, so I would assume that they're going to go back. I think within the GIBMP, and I'm loosely connected with that, they do in-service every year for those. But again, the GIBMP, what, 7 principles or whatever it is, it's nine principles. And so, you know, if we had a 7-hour training, 2 of the principles are going to get shortlisted this year. I mean, and so it's constant. I mean, and I think it's just, that's an IFAS thing. We've got to be doing better. So, Bob.
If I may answer that question, I'm a member of FNGLA and I teach certification in Fort Myers, Naples area. And we definitely focus one chapter just on BMPs, as well as the new textbook that came out through the certification professional, addressed introducing forbs and polyculture for the first time in the textbook.
Awesome, thank you.
We still have 2 minutes. I didn't talk that fast.
No, you had 20 minutes, 5 minutes. The totals.
Yeah,
Susan,
so,
sorry.
so I have I guess, a question on it, you know, so we have a lot of folks that are interested in, you know, water conservation, lowering inputs and thinking that the answer to that is removing turf grass and putting in other plants. And I think I had a question yesterday about, well, are we just not going to fertilize our plants because in our built environments, we still have to provide fertility to get them established. But I think the other focus in doing some of that is focusing on, you know, that number 1 FFL principles, right plant, right place. And so when I see some of the photos where, okay, we took the turf out between the sidewalk and the road and we put in bushes and mulch. So that's in my neighborhood. And when it rains, that mulch is going down the storm drain. When it's remulched, they keep piling it up. And this is what we see. The plant was here and now the mulch is up here because every year they want fresh mulch on it. So it goes back to that, is a plant in a mulch bed the right plant in that place? Or would it be better to have perennial peanut or, you know, Asiatic jasmine or turf grass? And so I think that in redesigning these landscapes, that's an educational point. I just wanted your thought on that, because there is right place, right plant. And there are places where, you know, turf grass or a like species is more appropriate than
Sure.
a mulch bed.
So the question was,
It's not.
it's really not a question, it's kind of a statement. Right plant, right place, principle number one. And I think that comes back to like with Gail's work and where do these go? What functionally, how do we make this happen? What I didn't tell you there is that 7.5 feet on both sides of these fences on the side yard and 10 feet on both sides of that fence are drainage easements. And you can't have any permanent structure in there. And so like when I built my shed, it had to be elevated and water flowed under it. But the mulch, first time, you know, I had a pile up against that fence, you know, because I'm in the rainy part of the state of Florida. I had 78 inches of rain last year. And so those are these design constraints. I walked out of the hotel this morning and there's this place that was St. Augustine grass, but it's mainly dead stolons, right? Okay, so on the one side, we might have said, well, let's put some hair grass there, but I would have said, no, let's put, you know, previous pavement or something, because also if you look at just the lay of the land, the swimming pool splash drains right through that corner. So, you know, but it's 4 feet wide by about 12 feet long. And it was saying, it was a stupid place to put grass, you know, I mean, so it's those kinds of things that, again, it goes back to the developer side. If they're developing, it is what it is. I'm done.
Yeah, that's all. Thank you.